Welcome to UC Talks, an interview series on Unapologetic Catholic where we dive into open, honest conversations with people who are passionate about their faith. In each episode, we bring together experts in their fields, individuals sharing powerful personal testimonies, and voices that, in their own unique ways, defend and illuminate the Catholic faith. UC Talks is all about exploring the truth and depth of Catholicism from every angle. No filter, no compromise. And so, today we have someone who is well known online for sharing what it's like to live as an Indian Catholic with same-sex attraction and her journey back to the church. She has worked as a media professional and is currently working in instructional design. She has also worked for some time as a full-time Catholic youth worker to help organize retreats and equip them to overcome their unique struggles and challenges. One saint that has been crucial in her conversion is Saint Paul, and a verse that she lives by is Galatians chapter 2 verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Please welcome Krysanne Martis. Krysanne, thank you for saying yes and coming on the second episode of UC Talks. How excited are you?
I'm quite excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Krysanne, last episode we had Ajin Joseph on the show and we had an amazing time just sharing about he actually shared a lot about his life, his mission that he's working on, the pro-life mission, youth that he's working with. And we had an amazing time. I think we spent around an hour or so just talking about, what he's doing in the pro-life missionary work and as a youth missionary. Today, I'm really excited to talk to you because I don't know if people know who you are and what you do, but I just want to ask you for the audience, can you tell us about yourself, where you're from, your family, your faith, your background basically?
Sure. So my name is Krysanne. I'm 25 years old and I live currently in Pune. And although my family is from Pune, I spent a majority of my life outside India. I grew up in Southeast Asia in this small country called Brunei Darussalam. And then I finished high school in Singapore and I moved back to Pune for college. So I've been here for the past 8 years, but I was brought up outside India.
All right. Krysanne, what was your childhood experience like as a Catholic? Did you enjoy it or did you feel it was like an obligation?
So I actually really enjoyed growing up as a Catholic. I loved Sunday school. I loved answering questions in Sunday school. I always knew all the right answers. And a lot of my friends really thought that I would grow up and become a nun. But it was mostly because I knew all the answers. And also now looking back, I think I just really liked knowing things. I was really good at school for the same reason. So it's probably the same thing that kind of carried forward to being Catholic and going to Sunday school.
All right, that's great. But we are here for an interview, and the reason why we are talking is because your life has been an inspiration to a lot, and especially to me. Like I've seen your videos, I've interacted with you. I think we met for the pro-life march, and I was so taken by your lifestyle. And I just wanted to bring you on the show and talk to you about, what you're struggling with, what you're experiencing right now. So let's just address the elephant in the room. Let's talk about your identity. That's something that we are going to talk about. So when was the first time you shared about how you were a good Catholic going for catechism classes and you were very forward in your faith. What happened? What was the point where you felt like you started questioning your identity?
So I think I was really young when I first realized that I experienced attraction to other women. I must have been quite young, probably like 10 or 11 years old. And I kind of became aware of this attraction. And pretty much from the start, I instinctively knew that this was something that would be at odds with the church and at odds with my faith. I remember asking this question in Sunday school or like youth programs as early as like 13 or 14 years old. I began asking this question. And I also I had the words to ask this question because I spent a lot of time on the internet. I was an expat living in a foreign country, so I did not have a lot of friends. And so the internet was my friend, specifically Tumblr. spent a lot of time on Tumblr. And so I kind of got the vocabulary for my identity. I began identifying as bisexual, and I knew that I had this attraction. And so I started asking questions like, is it okay to be gay? What does God think about gay people? What does the church think about gay people? As early as like 13 or 14 years old. And I never really got a satisfactory answer. I remember one time I tell the story a lot, but one time I asked this question in Sunday school. Actually, it was confirmation class, and it was a really small group of people. It was just like 8 people sitting around in the church library, and our teacher sitting amidst us. And she ended the class being like, oh, does anyone have any questions? And she probably was asking for questions about the lesson we had the day. But I raised my hand and I was like, what does God say about gay people? And there was this awkward pause, as I'm sure you can imagine. She was not expecting me to ask that. And after a moment or so, she said, well, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And then everybody laughed and I was so embarrassed. And the class came to an end. And this is just one of the instances. I think all the other times I asked this question, I asked it anonymously because I was just so ashamed of needing to know this answer. But I remember that pretty much from the beginning, it always felt like it was at odds with my faith, and I felt like I needed to kind of reconcile the two.
You mentioned about Tumblr. What exactly, like, how did you go to that the space, and what made you go to spaces like Tumblr or probably Twitter later on?
So like I mentioned, I did not have a lot of friends growing up, and I always felt like there were some things inside me that people could not really understand. And so I kind of sought out online spaces where I could be understood, where I could express myself or be myself and find a community of like-minded people. And Tumblr was that for me at the start, and like Twitter later on also became that place where I really felt like, because Tumblr was so kind of filled with so much of social justice ideology, so there was a lot of like pro-LGBT content on Tumblr. There was like, it was very anti homophobia, very like, pro being inclusive and accepting yourself, and no matter who you are or how you look or who you like, you are always special and loved. That was kind of the Tumblr gospel. And you'll probably like recognize this as something that has permeated to the entire internet now, but back then it was just Tumblr. So this is where all of this stuff came from, was Tumblr. And I really liked it. I had a lot of friends who kind of shared this identity with me, and they really were very affirming. They never made me feel like there was something wrong about who I was or even how I looked, because I was also very insecure about how I looked. And there was a lot of like, fat positivity, body positivity kind of stuff on Tumblr as well. And so I really felt like that was my safe space, and that was where I felt seen and known, and that's why I spent so much time there.
Right. You spoke a lot about being accepted, being felt like you were not accepted anywhere else but probably on Tumblr. How much do you think media impact did you have, or was it just like your experience with the people around you that wouldn't understand you? Do you think media had an impact on the way you were thinking, the way you were moving towards this lifestyle?
I think it definitely did. I remember I spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos back then. I used to watch a lot of YouTubers, kind of this like group of British YouTubers who became really big more than like a decade ago. And they were also super liberal and kind of embraced all of these ways of thinking. That was like my primary media intake, was that kind of stuff. And it kind of like, I guess you could say, normalized a lot of these taboo topics, normalize these identities, until a point where I just felt like it would be so ridiculous to even think that it's abnormal to be LGBT, or that these attractions are abnormal. That thought could not even cross my mind, because it was just so normal. The media that I was watching, the kind of music that I would listen to as well, was just really affirming all of these identities. So it was a big part of kind of me imbibing this kind of way of thinking where none of this is abnormal, everything is good and worthy to be celebrated.
What really solidified this identity in LGBT community? Like, what was the point where you felt like the church teachings like I cannot deal with what the church is teaching? And what was the moment where you felt like, man, I think I need to be part of the LGBTQ community?
I can't think of a particular moment, but I will say that for most of this kind of journey of trying to reconcile these two parts of my life, it was just a very mental, very intellectual thing. It wasn't real yet until I moved away from home, and I think I was 16. I went to a boarding school in Singapore, and there I actually entered into a relationship with another girl. And so kind of in the process of deciding to be in that relationship, I realized I was choosing one thing over the other. And so this was around the same time where I stopped going to church. I was very comfortable kind of dropping that part of my life. And that's, I guess you could say, when the identity became a reality, and I made the decision to fully accept that as who I was and put aside my faith, because that was at odds with what I identified as.
Did you ever find yourself being pulled into directions? I know at this point of time you're like, okay, the church clearly doesn't, seemed like the church doesn't accept me, but I still am drawn towards the church. Did you feel a pull from both sides, from the LGBTQ community and from the church? And like, what was the experience like, when this was happening to you, if this was happening to you?
I definitely felt a pull in both directions. Like I said, I grew up Catholic and I really liked being Catholic. I liked going to church. I remember my second year in Singapore, this is kind of when I had already entered this relationship and I was living this life. All my friends, I had come out to all of my friends. So everyone kind of knew that this was my identity. And it was Holy Week. And Holy Week meant, going for Maundy Thursday Mass, Good Friday service, Easter Vigil Mass. Like, this was my entire life growing up. And I remember sitting on my bed in the boarding school and just kind of like reckoning with myself, like, are we really going to miss Maundy Thursday Mass? Are we really going to miss Good Friday? Like, Holy Week was my favorite part of the entire liturgical calendar, even more than Christmas. I just felt like it was just so dramatic, like everything that the church did during that week. It was so meaningful. It was so, like, beautiful to witness. And I just couldn't kind of accept that I was really going to not go for any of these services. And I ended up, I think, going for the Easter Mass, but I missed like Good Friday and Maundy Thursday, which was, I think, at the time was the first time in my life that I missed those masses. But like there really was a turmoil, and I wasn't always aware of it. Like, sometimes it was a very subconscious thing, but it was definitely an undercurrent during those years. It wasn't very easy for me to drop that identity. It took a lot of struggle.
Were there moments in your life where you try to justify your lifestyle choices with your Catholic faith? And if you did, like, how did you reconcile between those two?
What comes to mind is when I moved back from Singapore, I moved back to Pune, and I kind of entered a really liberal college. And at the same time, I joined a youth group, a Catholic youth group. And it was probably during those years where I really, because I was kind of in touch with the church again, I was going for Sunday Mass. I used to go ever so often for these prayer meetings. And at the same time, I was living a sinful life in college. I was in impure relationships and things like that. And probably during that time, it was probably the first time where I tried to kind of justify what I was doing to myself. And my justification was mostly that, God wouldn't care what I was doing with my body as long as I wasn't hurting anyone and as long as I was happy. So those are like kind of what I would tell myself, is that, people are trying to tell me, or like people would say, if they knew the life I was living, people would say that what I'm doing is wrong, but God wouldn't, because God is love and God loves me and his love is unconditional. And so he wouldn't have an issue with it. And I'm concerned with him and not with all these other people. That's kind of how I would justify it to myself, I suppose.
Okay, Krysanne, were you really happy living that lifestyle? What you were doing versus what the church wanted you to do. Did it live up to the expectations that was set by the LGBTQ community?
I'm sure if you asked me back then, I would have said, yes, I'm happy. But now I can kind of tell you that I wasn't. But there was also some signs. Like, for example, I struggled with depression pretty much during all of those years. I was not actually diagnosed with it, but my school counselor was pretty sure that I had mild depression. He referred me to get properly diagnosed, but I never actually went and got diagnosed. I also would self-harm. That was a pretty big part of my life, and I also would think about ending my life quite often. And so I really wasn't happy, and I wasn't feeling as fulfilled as I would have liked. But I guess what I told myself, and what also unfortunately my friends told me, is that this is just what it means to grow up. Everyone's depressed. Everyone thinks of ending their lives. This is just a regular part of being an adult. And basically that, this, I just need to accept it as part of my life, as a fact of my life, and not try to get rid of it, or not try to change my life so that I no longer was depressed. It was just like, oh, this is just life. This is just how it's going to be forever.
Did you feel the reason why you moved to this lifestyle, do you ever feel misjudged by either your family, your friends, or the church? Do you feel like they judged you for who you think you were, and the struggle that you had with your identity?
I don't know if I experienced a lot of actual judgment from friends or family, and the reason for that is probably that if I knew that my lifestyle was not going to be accepted by someone, I just wouldn't tell them. So I was really living a very high degree of a double life, where I lied a lot, I hid a lot of things from different groups of people. And so even when I was kind of in this youth group, once I moved back to Pune, there were a lot of things of my life that I just did not tell them, or I just didn't show to them, because I definitely anticipated some kind of judgment, or I guess I was scared of being scolded or being told to stop doing what I was doing, and I just did not want to have those kinds of conversations. And so I hid a lot of things, kind of anticipating judgment.
Just looking at, where you were with your family, with the church, and how you moved to the LGBTQ lifestyle, and what led you to that particular lifestyle, it's really heartbreaking to hear the things that you've been through. It was I always had the desire to talk to someone. In my life, I was one day I will talk to someone who has come back to the faith, and I'm really glad to hear you talk about your life, because this is something that I personally was desiring to talk to someone, to understand, what really happened in their life, and how they struggled, and how they were mistreated, misjudged, and they went to the LGBTQ lifestyle, and that you're back now. I really applaud you for holding on to the faith, holding on to what God has asked of you. So I just want to pivot this whole thing to understand what made you come back to the faith. What made you pivot from that lifestyle, which seemed like, man, I'm in this forever now, to I don't think I can do this. I need to go back home.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's actually my favorite thing to talk about. So this happened in 2020, in the middle of the COVID lockdown. And I was at a pretty low point in my life. At that point, I had just finished college. I had begun working as an assistant director in the film industry in Bombay. And pretty early on in the lockdown, I lost a friend to suicide. And that was kind of one of the first wake-up calls that I had, because we were pretty close. We kind of shared a lot of our life together, and we also looked at the world in the same way. We had the same kind of ideology. And when she chose to end her life, I kind of thought, is this also my fate? Am I kind of hurtling down towards the same conclusion? Is this just the natural conclusion to the way that I look at the world, to the way I look at myself, to the way I lead my life? So that was kind of my first wake-up call. And then the second thing that kind of happened during those months, it was in the middle of the lockdown, I was invited to attend this Catholic virtual leadership summit kind of conference. And the only reason I said yes to attending that conference is because it was the lockdown and I had a really terrible sleep schedule. I used to go to sleep at like 6 or 7 in the morning and sleep until the afternoon and things like that. And I really just wanted to fix that. And this conference, it happened over a few days and it would start at like 9 in the morning or 10 in the morning. And so I needed to wake up and attend that. And so that's the only reason I signed up for it. I was like, okay, at least I'll fix my sleep schedule this way. And one session that I attended in that conference, this guy was talking about St. Paul. And he kind of like said it in a very offhandish way. He said, so we all know that St. Paul used to be a persecutor of Christians before he encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus. And I was like, wait, I didn't know that St. Paul used to persecute Christians. I definitely heard the story of the road to Damascus when I was younger, but it never actually clicked that Paul was a very passionate Jewish man who was going around with literally a list of Christians to persecute, to throw into jail or to kill. And when I heard that story, I didn't believe it. So I looked it up. That's in my nature. I don't believe things. And so I immediately looked it up in the Bible. And it was true. Paul was this like very passionate, like, persecutor of Christians. And for some reason, I just got really stuck on that one fact that this guy mentioned in the session. And the reason I got so stuck on it is because I guess deep down, I kind of felt, I guess at the time, that I had done so many things that were wrong, or that the church said were wrong, that God would say were wrong, that I kind of began to believe subconsciously that I was beyond saving, I was beyond redemption. Now, I didn't even want to be redeemed. I didn't even want to be like, forgiven. I didn't believe in any of that stuff. But I guess subconsciously, I had also begun to believe that even if I wanted it, I would not get it. Like that ship had sailed, I'd chosen my lot in life. There was no rescuing me now. Even if I wanted to become a good girl, like I couldn't do that anymore. That ship had sailed. And when I heard the story of St. Paul, I kind of was exposed to this nature of Jesus, that he was really unconditionally forgiving. That if he could forgive Paul for all the people that he had killed and persecuted and thrown into prison, then Jesus could forgive me. I had never, killed a Christian in my life. For all my sins, I'd never done that. And so I realized that if I actually wanted to go back to God, he would have me. He would forgive me. That's the first time in my life that I really realized that. And almost immediately, like in the moment that I realized that Jesus's forgiveness is actually unconditional, in the same moment, I wanted it. Like place deep inside me that I wasn't even aware of was like, I want that, Jesus. I want to be forgiven. I want that unconditional forgiveness. I want to come back to you. I don't want to walk around with all of this guilt. I'm so tired of feeling guilty all the time. I just want to come back. And that was kind of like the moment of, I guess you could say, my conversion. Although like it happened over like a long time, in the sense of I heard the story, and then from the very next day, I decided I was going to start reading the Bible. I started reading the daily gospel every day for a really long time. For like some months, I started praying every day. And over again, the gospel would just show me the forgiving nature of Jesus, the loving nature of Jesus, that he would not condemn, he would always forgive, that he would reach out and touch people and heal them, that he wanted to heal them, he wanted to forgive them. And that just became real to me during those years, during those months, all these stories that I had listened to growing up that never actually sunk in. It sunk in during those months because I realized that I was that person who needed forgiveness, who needed healing. And I realized that Jesus would not withhold that from me, that he would just give it to me if I asked. And so I decided that I wanted that. I wanted to come back to him.
Wow, that really inspired me to see how, I can relate with you. Like, even in my life, I've been in like the worst situations in my life. And when I came back to Christ, I felt like, man, I don't think I'm worth it. And to hear it from you, the life that you have gone through, and to be at that point and say, you know what, God still loves me, I'm coming back. That, like, I got goosebumps just listening to you about that. But did you face any resistance from yourself? Did you feel like, man, I don't think, did you doubt yourself? Were there fears, either from yourself, I would say, or like from people? Did you ever feel that?
Definitely. I would say probably because at the start it was just kind of like, oh, Jesus loves me so much. He he wants to forgive me, he wants me to come back to him, he's not going to judge me. So kind of that joy and the elation at the start only carried me so far. And then I guess probably like a couple of months down the line, I kind of realized that I needed to do things to respond to that love. Like I needed to actually repent in order to get the forgiveness. I needed to actually remove things from my life. I needed to start working on my bad habits, on the things that I was doing that was like actively sinful. I needed to start removing those things from my life. Like the moment like that clicked, it became a little hard. I remember like I realized I realized that I needed accountability. I needed to tell someone about these things in my life that I wanted to remove. Like, for example, being in impure relationships. I used to like be in like texting relationships with a lot of like different guys and things like that. And I just needed to stop doing that. But I needed accountability, because if I didn't tell anyone, then I would just fall back into it again. And so just deciding to be transparent with a friend and a mentor, I decided I would tell her about these parts of my life. It was just so hard that it was really tempting to just not do it at all. And but I kind of realized that this was a potential for me to turn my life around. Like this was my chance to turn my life around. And if I did not do any of these things, if I did not actively decide to put down things that were hurting me and hurting my relationship with God, then nothing would change and I would be the same. And I would not be kind of taking the full advantage of this opportunity that God was giving me. And so I just decided to bite the bullet and do it anyway. I was very, very ashamed. It's kind of like when you go for confession after a really long time and you really don't want to say the sin out loud, but the moment you do, it's just so much easier and that shame just kind of melts away. And it was the same thing when I decided to be transparent with a friend and ask her to hold me accountable, is that it was really, really hard until I did it. And then it was the easiest thing in the world. She was so loving. She understood me. She never judged me. She completely accepted everything that I shared with her. And she was so good as an accountability partner. She would ask me difficult questions about what I was doing and who I was with and things like that. And that really helped me to be accountable. So there was like a little bit of a struggle in terms of like, do I really need to do this hard thing? Can't I just be so happy in the love of God and the forgiveness and the mercy and just kind of be float in that place forever? But then I realized in order for it to be real, I needed to do the hard things. And when I did the hard things, the joy and the love became so much more real and so much more complete, I would say.
Wow. Two things happen when there's a change, right? One set of people are really happy, the other set of people are not really happy.
Yeah.
So what happened in this transition when you transitioned back to your faith? What was the reaction of your friends and families who wanted you back, and what was the reaction of your LGBTQ friends?
So my mom was the happiest. So actually, I remember going into the kitchen one day and I told her that I wanted to leave my job. I wanted to quit my job as an assistant director in Bombay and I wanted to do something else because I did not feel like God wanted me to lead that kind of life. And my mother immediately burst into tears and she was like, I've been praying for this for years. And my response was like, how rude? Like, how can you pray for me to leave this job that I had been dreaming of and working on for so many years? But her initial reaction was just that, she was just so joyful because she recognized that however little I shared with her in that conversation, she recognized that I was deciding to live my life for Jesus. And she was so happy because of that. And so the reaction, I guess, from my mom in particular, but also from my friends who I began sharing my journey with and who really helped me to walk with the Lord, there was just so much of joy and probably even relief, of the prodigal son returning home or the lost lamb finally being found. There was just a lot of joy there. And on the other side of it, I guess you could say in the start, my friends kind of were aware of the fact that I had some kind of I had some kind of encounter and my spirituality or my faith kind of became real for me, they were kind of aware of it, because I began posting Bible verses on my Instagram story. And like sometimes when they would tell me they were struggling with something, I'd be like, oh, I'll pray for you, which is something I would never do before. So they kind of realized that there was something happening, but they were not too curious about it. And I remember even one time receiving an email from a friend where she was like, oh, I'm so happy that you found something that's bringing you joy and comfort during this time. And it was just kind of like, people were like, they didn't have an issue with it until I began sharing my faith online. And this was probably like 2 years after my conversion, when I decided that I was gonna go public about being pro-life, which was like, something that before I was pro-choice. And that opinion was one of the many opinions that changed after my conversion. And I decided that I would start sharing my thoughts online, because for some reason, there was a conversation about abortion happening on the internet, and I wanted to contribute to that. And so when I kind of came out as pro-life, and shortly after that shared my testimony on the internet, is when all of my college friends, basically overnight or over a very short period of time, all of them kind of blocked me out of their lives. They canceled me, and I've not talked to them. A lot of them, I've not talked to them since. So I guess they were okay with my faith until it kind of became this issue of like opinion on different like political topics. And that's when they were like, we're like supporting your faith journey and stuff, until it becomes inconvenient, and then we're no longer going to be your friends. So yeah, it was really sad for me as well, because a lot of those people, like, I imagined them at my wedding, I imagined them to be part of my life for the rest of my life, but I guess they decided that they could no longer be my friend after I shared these opinions.
Well, all we can do is just pray for them and hope that they come to see the truth, right? Like you came back. One thing that really changed my life was the theology of the body. I don't know how much impact the theology of the body has had on you. My favorite saint and my favorite pope is Pope John Paul II, and he has really changed my life with the theology of the body. Has the TOB helped you understand your identity and sexuality better?
You can probably tell by my massive smile that it has. But I actually regard reading the theology of the body as my second conversion. So the first one was kind of like a hard conversion, where I realized that God would forgive me and that I was not too far gone to be like saved by Jesus. And that was like the first conversion point in my life. But the second one was when I read Theology of the Body for Beginners by Christopher West, which is an awesome job kind of summarizing the teachings of Pope John Paul II. And my friend and mentor, who was my accountability partner, she recommended that I read that book. And I read it probably like 6 months after my conversion. And that literally, I'm not even kidding, it blew my mind, because I realized like up until that point, my entire view of like our bodies and sexuality was completely warped. It was so incorrect that it was laughable. And when I read how Pope John Paul II kind of understood our bodies, how the church understands our bodies, our sexuality, everything else made sense. Like, I had literally no more questions about why homosexual behavior is a sin, why sex outside of marriage is a sin, why masturbation is a sin. Like, I had no more questions. Literally every single question was answered after reading that book. And not only were my questions answered, but my love and my reverence for my body and my sexual faculty, it just skyrocketed. I began to see my body the way God sees my body. And that was just a game changer, because I no longer felt like it was unimportant. I realized that sex is so important. It's so very important that it belongs in this beautiful context of marriage, of the one-time, long-term committed relationship between a man and a woman. And that just gave me so much of hope and so much of peace about leaving all of these attachments, all of these sinful inclinations that I had, of leaving everything behind. I just felt so much of hope about it, because I realized that I really was giving it up for the sake of something so beautiful and so perfect. that I don't even know how much of this is going to make sense for someone who's not read Theology of the Body, but it's not something I can summarize in a sentence now anyway. But yeah, it was really a massive changing point. I remember when I read Theology of the Body, I was talking about it with my friend, and I was like, why didn't anyone tell me any of this before? Like, if you just told me these, like, if you just told me these beautiful reasons behind the teachings of the Catholic Church, I would have been sold, like, you know, from the start. But no one did. And I remember you telling my friend, like, oh, we should start, like, you know, telling people about this. Like, we need to. And she was like, oh, there are actually a lot of Theology of the Body conferences and stuff like that. But I was like, why didn't anyone tell me? I think if someone had told me, I would have never, I wouldn't have done like 90% of the things I did. And I would not have been so lost and so confused and so opposed to the church.
One of the main things of the Theology of the Body is what God calls us and what St. John Paul II talks about is chastity. Now, do you still struggle with same-sex attraction right now? Or are you able to move on from that?
I would say that it's like 99% gone, praise God. I no longer feel that attraction anymore. Not as much as I used to. And also, even if I do, I would say that they are like fleeting thoughts that are just gone in the next moment. And that's really, I feel it's a beautiful blessing from God that He's allowed me to just kind of be completely free of these attractions. I know that there are a lot of Catholics with deep-seated same-sex attraction out there for whom this cross is a daily cross. It's a daily struggle. And I have a lot of empathy for them, because I can't even imagine what it must be like to have to deal with that. But I no longer struggle with that, praise God.
Praise God. So talking about that, right? So that's why I think St. John Paul II talks about chastity and says it's so important for us to practice chastity. Like, even as a married man, I think I am called to be chaste, right? Also, how do you define chastity in this hyper-sexualized culture? What's your take on it? Because I know that you've come from one lifestyle, moved on to this. I know that you've been able to, you know, come back to your original self. But there are, as you said, like, there are some people who are still struggling with it, who might have chosen to follow the church's teachings, but are called to a chaste life. Is it regressive? What is it? What is your definition of chastity?
I think if you had asked me when I was in college, I would have definitely told you that it's a regressive and old-fashioned word that, like, you know, bears no repeating in today's cultural landscape. But now I have a lot of love for this virtue. What does chastity mean to me? I would say it means treating our bodies in line with what they are, and treating our sexual faculty in line with what it is. And what happens in this kind of hypersexualized culture that we live in is that we really denigrate our sexuality, and we make it into this really cheap thing that, you know, just gives you like cheap pleasures. It's just another bodily function. That's something you'll hear people say a lot. And that's not in line with what it really is. Like, there's a mismatch over there. A word that comes to mind, that has come to mind many times over the years, is there's an incoherence where we feel like it's not important, and so we don't treat it as such. So you'll see, for example, like some of our, like, you know, biggest pop stars today will kind of just wear like lingerie, like, you know, they won't dress modestly by any standard, because it's just a body, and those parts of your body are not special. They're just like any other part of your body. But then on the other hand, you have people talking about, like, you know, sexual abuse and sexual harassment. And the reason these issues are so important and so hurtful and so like basically important to us is because these parts of our bodies are very, very important. They're precious and important and different from any other parts of our bodies. And I feel like there's this incoherence in the culture where, like, you know, on the one hand, you have people saying, oh, it's not important, it's just another regular part of your body. Sex is just a regular kind of animalistic instinct. There's nothing special about it. But then on the other hand, you see this instinct that we have, that we cannot leave behind, that sex is important, that sex belongs in very specific contexts, that it cannot be misused, that it cannot be abused. There's something very precious about it. And I feel like chastity is basically bringing coherence into this way of thinking, where you recognize that our sexual faculty is a very important an intrinsic part of our identity, and then you treat it as such. And that's something that has brought so much of peace and like harmony to my life, that I'm no longer treating my body as just a hunk of meat that it doesn't matter what I do with it. I'm treating it as something that has great spiritual and theological significance, and so that is in harmony with what it really is. And so I'm no longer living this kind of double life, or this like, you know, where I'm constantly fighting against my nature. But everything that I'm doing, or everything I'm trying to do, I'm not a perfectly chaste person, but I am trying to treat my body in harmony with what it really is. And I feel like that's kind of what chastity is to me.
There are a lot of myths and misconceptions about same-sex attraction. I'm sure you must have encountered them. Some people must have told you, or you must have heard it on the internet. Do you want to debunk some of those? Do you know if any of these myths you can think of and you can debunk them?
A few come to mind. One of them is probably from the LGBT community, that this is who you are. You are defined by your attractions. And I feel like this is the biggest lie that we need to kind of combat, is that we are not our attractions, and we are especially not our sinful attractions. And what happens is, when we kind of accept that these identities are that these attractions are a part of people's identities, it becomes a personal attack when we say that it's sinful. For example, homosexual activity is sinful. That's what the church teaches. When we say that, it becomes a personal attack. So I think sometimes we need to start our conversation by talking about who we are. And we are not defined by our attractions. We are not defined by our sinful inclinations, but we are defined by our Creator. And God says that we are precious, we are loved, we are created in His image and likeness, and we are altogether wonderful. That's what He says about us. And I think we need to kind of combat this kind of way of thinking that, you know, our attractions are our identity. And the way that I do that is I no longer use the identity bisexual. And this is not to say that, you know, anyone who uses that identity to define themselves is wrong. Sometimes I will use it to define myself, because my Instagram videos can only be 90 seconds long, and it's faster to say bisexual Catholic than it is to say Catholic with same-sex attraction. And so sometimes I will use the label, but that's not how I think of myself, and that's not how I would prefer to explain or to identify myself. And so like, these are ways in which even when speaking about people who are part of the LGBT community, I would refer to them as people living with same-sex attraction, but not gay people, because I don't think that, you know, our attractions really define who we are. Another misconception that, you know, I wish we could correct is kind of coming from the Catholic community. Is a lot of people, I've noticed, like, you know, Catholics, the way that we look at LGBT people is those people out there who are trying to get our kids, who are trying to brainwash our children, who are trying to ruin our culture, things like that. And surely some of these things are true in terms of the LGBT ideology. It is an evil ideology, it's harmful, it attacks our human identity. And so in those cases, yes, it needs to be opposed. But what happens is that people kind of take this the evil ideology and apply it to people by calling them evil as well. And I have been like, you know, I have heard this be said when I was sitting in the audience. I've had, like, you know, in Catholic circles and like prayer meetings on different contexts, I will have people go up in front of everyone and say, those people out there, the LGBT community out there is trying to get us. And I think a lot of Catholics don't realize that a lot of Catholics do have same-sex attraction. Like, you know, it's not those people out there versus us, but amongst us, we have people who are living with this, who are trying to reconcile this attraction with their faith, who see it as a struggle, who are trying to resist it. And those people are the people who are getting hurt by the way in which we talk about this issue. And I wish that, you know, people just kind of I wish that people had more compassion for members of the LGBT community and even spoke about them with compassion. Even when we are in our circles, we need to speak about them with compassion, because we don't know what people are struggling with. And until I became public about my story, I heard a lot of things being said about the LGBT community that felt like it applied to me, even though it didn't. That's another thing that I wish we would do differently.
Krysanne, how would you explain the church's teachings on sexuality and identity to someone who feels hurt by it or condemned by it?
That's a really good question, and this is how I wish it was explained to me when I was younger and I was asking these questions. And basically, the church makes a distinction between the person and the action. And the action itself, which is the homosexual act, for example, acting on your same-sex attraction, that would be a sin. But simply feeling the inclination to act, or the attraction, or the state of being gay, or the state of being bisexual, is not inherently sinful. It is disordered. So the church teaches that these attractions are disordered in the sense that they go against the natural or the correct order for our bodies and our attractions. For example, feeling intense anger in a moment. For example, if you someone does something to you and you feel that intense anger, there's something disordered about that. God does not want us to experience that anger, but we do. Now, that is not sinful. But if you were to lash out, if you were to do something violent, if you were to say something that is verbally abusive or wrong, that would be a sin. But simply experiencing that anger is not a sin. Even in the context of a heterosexual relationship, right? Sometimes a man might experience attraction for a woman who he is not married to. Now, simply experiencing that attraction is not a sin. But if you were to act on it, that would be a sin. And that's something that I wish people told me when I was younger, because what I kept hearing whenever people explained the church's teaching to me, what I kept hearing is, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you. Who you are is intrinsically bad and intrinsically sinful. And that's a lot to put on people who are just trying to understand what the church teaches. And it kind of feels like, okay, then I can't be part of the church. These two things in my life are mutually exclusive. I can't be Catholic as well as experience these attractions, because it seems like who I am inherently, God has a problem with that. And I wish that more people would consistently make the distinction between the two and not lean too heavily on one side and not on the other side.
Yeah, that is so true. That is absolutely true. Krysanne, I've seen a lot of videos on Instagram that you put. You've obviously are publicly talking about these things. How do you deal with navigate discussions with people who don't agree with you, especially in the comments, or also people who must have your friends who must have spoken to you? How do you navigate this situation, especially about homosexuality? What do you say to them?
So when it comes to my public ministry, I try really hard to be pro-conversation, which means that whenever people respond, they leave a comment on my videos or they respond to me in my DMs, I try to engage them in a conversation rather than to just shut them down, to just call them names or say that they are wrong or they never understand where I'm coming from. And so what this usually looks like is asking questions. So this is something that I try to do a lot. If someone says that they disagree with me, or if someone will say oh, this is just insane behavior. I've had people comment that on my videos. I try to engage them in a conversation by asking them oh, what do you mean by that? Or what part of my video do you disagree with? And I try to engage them. Now, not everyone is open to conversation. If it devolves to name calling or using abusive language, I just kind of delete the comment and no longer engage with the person. But what ends up happening is I sometimes have really good conversations with people, and especially people who will start with a lot of anger and a lot of opposition. Once I engage them in conversation, they kind of lose that steam and they're more willing to converse in a respectful manner. And I believe that in most cases, when you treat people respectfully, they are respectful back at you. And that's kind of the approach that I take with my Instagram, because I don't believe that the way to approach this topic is by just shouting at people and telling them even the truth, shouting the truth at them and having them shout back that they disagree, and we never actually kind of engage with each other. I feel like real conversion comes through conversation, and that's what I like to do, is really talk to people. And what ends up happening is that I've actually been able to meet with quite a few people in person here in Pune and have conversations with them. I've had coffee with a few people who saw my videos on Instagram and had issues with what I was saying. And what ends up happening is that when we meet in person and talk about these things, I become more human to them and they become more human to me. And so even if we disagree, I can remember that this is not like, a faceless person who I disagree with, but a real person with a real history, with a real life, with real questions and struggles. And they see me in a similar light. And so we're able to understand each other better.
Yeah, it's so important for us to see the human behind the keyboard warrior, right? Like even for us, like when we talk about, stuff that we are passionate about, we should also understand that there are, unless there are like AI bots, but usually they are humans, right? They are the ones responding, and they, as you said, like they have these emotions, they have these things charged up, and when you say something that they don't agree with, man, they just lose it. So I think what you do is so important, to just engage with them, and especially the meeting them and having a coffee with them, man, that's something that I think that would really break all the walls that they have probably built behind the comment section. What are these objections? Like you spoke about that you've engaged with them. What are these objections that, or some questions, especially from the people who are struggling with same-sex attraction? What are these objections and questions that you get from them?
I think the number one thing that I've been hearing lately is just this question about like, what can I do, right? Like, okay, so you're saying that God does not condemn me, that I am not inherently sinful, that this attraction is not inherently sinful, but if I were to act on it, that would be sinful. Does that mean that I just need to live the rest of my life alone? And I think like that's the main thing that I hear, is just this like fear of living the rest of their lives in loneliness if they were to be faithful to the teachings of the church. And that's something I've kind of tried to talk about a little bit on my page, which is that, marriage and sexual relationships and romantic relationships are not the only way that we can find happiness, and they don't completely combat loneliness either. Like I have friends who are married and they sometimes feel lonely. I have friends who are single and they have very happy lives. And so the question is, what really brings happiness? Where does joy really come from? And where does fulfillment really come from? And I really believe, because see, I'm a single person and I don't know if I'm going to get married. I would love to be married one day, but not met the right person yet. And so like, when people say these things, what I try to respond is just to say that, I'm single, but I find a lot of fulfillment and happiness and joy in my life. And this is what I believe for you as well, is that even if you have a deep-seated same-sex attraction, where you don't see it possible that one day you'll be attracted to someone of the opposite sex, even then, there's joy for you, there's happiness for you, there's satisfaction and fulfillment for you in a life led with Jesus and with other Christians in a committed relationship. You can have really good friends, you can have community around you. That's where joy comes from, that's where satisfaction comes from. And you are not doomed to a life of loneliness. Like Jesus loves you so much, he would not want you to live alone. But that's the number one kind of objection that I receive from people. And then you have like, the other objections, which is like, it's my body and my choice. How can a loving, committed relationship be wrong? But I've kind of found that in most cases, people are just really, really scared of being alone. And that's what kind of is making them push back against this teaching. And that's why I feel like it's important to have compassion for these people, to not label them as like, degenerates or whatever, but just really to have compassion for the people who just don't want to be alone. And that's like something we can all relate to. Like, it's not like, oh, if you're LGBT, you have this greater fear of being alone. All of us have a fear of being alone. So to just speak to that.
Yeah. Have you ever had people ask you like, or tell you like, God made me this way and I'm born this way? How do you respond to that?
Well, I guess there's two ways to respond. And one way is like kind of using scientific data, right? And the data tells us that the genetic contribution to same-sex attraction is negligible. And so like, it's not so much that people are born that way, but that, the circumstances of their childhood or the circumstances of their life have kind of worked together to create this kind of experience in them. But I would say that even if the data changes, even if you find a study that kind of proves as like genetic or whatever, we have people, we know, like science tells us that there are people who are born with a genetic predisposition to be alcoholic, right? Like, so we know that sometimes our DNA kind of works against us, like it gives us predispositions to different things. the point is, what do we do with that, right? I think people who are born with a genetic predisposition towards alcoholism are still kind of called to, like, push back against that and to try their hardest to kind of live, like, good lives, holy lives, despite their genetic predisposition. And I would say the same thing applies to people with same-sex attraction, is even if we feel like our attractions are an intrinsic part of our nature, we still are called to live holy lives. We still are called to be saints. And sometimes that means that we have to push back against something that we feel is very, very deeply part of us. But the good news is that God gives us the grace to do that. We are not in it alone. And even if we fall, and even if we kind of go back to what we left behind, even then God gives us the opportunity to repent and come back to Him every single day, if that's what it takes. And so I would say that, this the born this way argument is a kind of excuse. Maybe it is like something that we tell ourselves that we don't have to do the hard thing. But I think the saints do the hard things, and everyone's doing hard things. And so sometimes we feel like, like it's a very unfair cross that people with same-sex attraction are given. But I think everyone's carrying a really hard cross. There's probably someone out there who just like, who is just so prideful that they can't like, allow themselves to be humble. They can't accept that they are wrong. Everyone, like, knows someone like that who can't accept that they are wrong. For them, that's the cross that they have to carry every day, is humbling themselves to accept that they sometimes don't know the answers, humbling themselves to put down their pride and accept, like, humility.
Yeah.
And so every single person is carrying a cross that to them feels like the hardest and the heaviest cross. And so we're all really in this boat together.
A question that I wanted to just ask and just clarify, you spoke about how God calls us to a certain lifestyle and the world calls us to a certain lifestyle. Since your conversion, how has your understanding changed about, like, authentic love and acceptance? How's your understanding changed from that to understand what God is calling us, what love is God calling us, and what love the world is talking about?
Yeah, I think the world, when the world talks about love, the world talks about unconditional acceptance. And so however you are and whatever you do and whatever lifestyle you choose to have, to unconditionally accept that lifestyle would be to love you. But I think the love that God has for us is not that kind of love. It is the love that a parent has for a child, where the parent loves the child so much that the parent wants what's best for the child. And sometimes that means correcting the child. Sometimes that might even mean reprimanding the child, or kind of steering the child away from danger and towards, like, a better path. And I feel that's the love that God has for us. And when I was kind of living my worldly life, I kind of saw this love as a very mean and conditional love. Like, I thought, like, so you only love me as long as I'm doing all the right things. But actually, what I did not understand about love is that sometimes we're not able to receive love because of the place that we are in our life. And I kind of like use the analogy of the dirty window, which I think comes from C.S. Lewis, where the love that God has for us is like sunshine, and it's like always shining. It's constant. It never changes. It's always the same intensity. It's always constant. But sometimes our window is so dirty that it can't come through. And what we need to do is clean the window. That is our response to God's love, is that we clean the window so that more of the love can come in. And sometimes the window becomes dirty again and we have to clean it again. But, like, love also demands a kind of reciprocation, that we need to love God back. And the other thing that I feel is different about how I see love now is that love is a decision. So it's not just a feeling. It's not just like feeling really happy all the time, feeling the butterflies all the time, but it's about deciding to love someone. And for me and my relationship with God, that looks like deciding every single day to live a chaste life, to live a holy life as much as I can, even when it's hard, even when I don't want to, even when it would be so much easier to just not do it. Deciding to do it anyway is what it looks like to love, because that's how God loves us, that He loved us when it was difficult. He loved us when He was hanging from the cross. He loved us when it hurt. He loved us when He was crying tears of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. He loved us in all those difficult moments. And so I believe, like, now when I look at love, I see love as a decision that I make even when it's hard. And Yeah, and also like the way that I love like my family, the way that I love my friends has also changed, where it's no longer as long as I'm having a good time with you, I'm going to love you. But it also means that I'm going to love you through the difficult conversations. I'm going to love you enough to tell you when I think you're doing something that's hurting you. And I would also hope that my friends and my family would do that for me.
Yeah, that is so true. I think the world has equated love to sex, and I think that's so out of place, because it cannot be further from the truth. Like, you can experience love without sex. So that's why I think for people who struggle with SSA, I think for them, a lot of people tell them, oh, you feel this, it must be that you're gay, it must be that you're lesbian. Like, always equating, probably like, if I feel this intense love for my sister, or like for me guy as a brother, or for you as a sister, and the world equates that to like, oh, you must be gay or you must be lesbian, putting that label on you. It's so important for us to understand the difference between what God talks about love and what the world talks about love. And I think you have really very elegantly presented that the analogy of love, of how we don't experience it because we have tainted, like we've put this like a taint on our windows and we can't experience that. And that was such a beautiful analogy that you spoke about. How would you what would you say to someone who is right now probably struggling with these attractions, okay, with experiencing God's love, probably tainted their window, and their faith, like these attractions that they have, and the faith? What would you tell them?
That's a really good question. I guess I would tell them, first of all, that God loves you, and that means that God is not waiting to throw you into hell. He is not waiting to get you or to catch you in a bad place. He is not looking at you with disappointment. He's not looking at you with disgust. When he looks at you, he only looks at you with eyes full of love. And anyone who has told you that God is this like really judgmental, mean old man in the sky has lied to you, because God is not that. He just loves you. And the second thing that I would say is that that there's nothing that you have done in your life that Jesus will not forgive. There's nothing that you can say that will push him away. He is just waiting for you to come back to him. And so no matter where you are, no matter what you have done, no matter how many years you have spent away from God, if today you just said, Jesus, I want you back in my life, he will come back. He will like take you back into his arms. And so do that. If you feel like you need to go back to Jesus, then don't let anything that you have done in your past stop you. The other thing that I would say is that maybe it feels like you want God to love you, you want to come back to his love, but you can't feel anything. And maybe something that would help is going for confession, because it's really the same thing as taking the trash out. Like, you're making room in your heart, you're making room in your life for God again. And so don't be afraid, go for confession. It's only really hard until you actually do it. And then it's the easiest thing in the world. So go for confession, take the trash out, and you'll be really surprised by how much more room there is in your life to experience that love. And the last thing I would say is that if you want to talk, if you have questions, then you can always message me. I am Dal Rice Fish Fry on Instagram, and I would be very happy to have a conversation with you.
Do you have any practical tips that or advice that you could give to someone who's struggling with SSA? I know two of the things you spoke about is confession and talking to someone, like they can reach out to you. But like tips that helped you come out from that lifestyle to where you are right now.
I think the importance of an accountability partner cannot be overstated. Like, I think that if you are someone who's struggling with this, find a person who you trust, maybe a friend or a mentor or someone in your church, maybe a priest who you really like, and just kind of like, tell him very honestly what you are struggling with, and even share with him or share with your friend occasions where you might be tempted to act on this attraction. So just kind of be really honest about the potential for sin in your life, the sinful situations that you might be in occasionally. Just be honest with them about that, and with them kind of brainstorm ways in which you can avoid these situations, and or maybe avoid these people or avoid this group of friends, for example, and so that you can live a more holy life. And then follow up with them, so meet with them like, once a week or once in 2 weeks, and kind of share very honestly what has happened in that time, whether or not you have like, slipped up, or whether you have been like, faithful to your decision. So the importance of an accountability partner, it's so important to have someone like that in your life. Another thing that I would like say is just like to pray, to spend a lot of time praying, and especially sit in the adoration chapel. That's like my favorite place in the world. You're face to face with Jesus. He can speak directly to you. Sit in the adoration chapel, make a date every week, maybe go for an hour. I like to go on Saturday or Sunday. So make a decision to go for an hour to the adoration chapel, so you can spend more time face to face with Jesus and allow him to kind of do whatever needs to be done in your heart, in your mind. You don't need to go in there and like, figure things out or heal yourself, but Jesus will do that for you if you give him the opportunity. The last thing that I would say is kind of like the opposite. So if you have deep-seated same-sex attraction, then maybe you don't want to spend time around people who you would be attracted to. But the opposite of that would be to work on your relationship with people of the same sex. So have good friends. If you are a guy, have good guy friends who are trying to follow Jesus with their lives, who will relate to you in a healthy manner, and work on those friendships. That's what I did when I was kind of like, leaving this lifestyle behind, is that I was so blessed to be surrounded by some really, really good and holy women who are trying to follow Jesus, who are running after him, running after his heart. And I felt so completely safe around them to kind of realize my own womanhood, to realize my own femininity, to kind of embrace who I really was. And I think that's so important with people of the same sex, people who have same-sex attraction, is that they struggle to relate healthily with people of the same sex. And so kind of try to work on that, but if you feel like it's too hard, or if you feel like now is not the right time, then don't focus on that. But that would be a good like long-term goal, is to have a good group of friends of the same sex who will be a safe space, around whom you feel seen and heard and known and loved.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think that will help a lot of them to work on whatever they're going through right now. Do you watch sci-fi movies?
Which one are you thinking of in particular?
Any sci-fi movie that talks about time travel. If you have a time machine, and if you have to go back in time and talk to your younger self, especially the one who was struggling with same sex at that point of time, what would you say to her?
Honestly, I just think I would give her a really big hug. I think I was just so lonely back then. I feel like I might tear up just thinking about it. But I was so lonely back then. I didn't have friends. I felt like no one really saw me, and no one really loved me. Or if someone really saw me, they would not love me. Then I think that, instead of just talking about the issues, or like, trying to share with her like the theology of the body or whatever, I think I would just hug her and hold her and try to show her like how God sees her and how God loves her. And I think that if I had that, like if I knew how much he loved me, I would not have gone searching for his love in different places. And there's a lot of things that I would say, but it would just mostly have to do with the fact that, there's nothing wrong with you. And you are so loved just as you are. And all of you, like even the parts that you're ashamed of, or you feel like there's something wrong, all of you is altogether precious in the eyes of God. And that's what I would say to her.
Man, it was so good to have you, to listen to you, to hear everything that you went through. I had an amazing time just listening to all the stories and all the experiences that you had. And your testimony is so powerful, and I'm sure you've already touched so many lives with your testimony and with your words and encouraging them. I'm really proud of you, and I'm really praying for you and your ministry. And I hope that God empowers you to do much more than what you're doing now. I hope the ministry that you are working with and the people that you're working with, that God empowers all of you all to reach out to many people who are struggling with this, especially in the Catholic community, right? Many of these people are in the Catholic community and they are actively struggling. Probably they've not spoken to anyone about this, and to hear you talk about these things, I think it would just encourage them. It would give them a positive pathway to follow, rather than have someone who has no idea about identity, sexuality and love to take them to a path where they don't want to be in. So I'm really glad for you, and I pray for you, and I pray for your ministry. And thank you for being here and for sharing your life with us. It was amazing to talk to you. If you can just talk to the people about, like, where they can find you on probably Instagram, Twitter, if you can just talk about that.
For sure. So I am on Instagram and my username is Dal Rice Fish Fry. The dal has 2 A's. So it's DAAL, Dal Rice Fish Fry. And you can find me there. That's how I
think dal is supposed to be spelled.
That's what I think so as well. But then people get confused.
I don't know why they do DAL.
It's just wrong. But yeah, so I make videos on my Instagram about my experience as an Indian Catholic with same-sex attraction. I also talk about different things, especially about how we can have conversations that matter, how we can have conversations with people who disagree with us, and I also just kind of share about my life on there. So if you would like to chat, you can always message me on Instagram and I will reply to you. And that's basically the only way that you can contact me. You can also, I guess, email me. You can follow me on Substack, where I write a kind of weekly newsletter. I really like writing long form articles about different things that are weighing on my mind. So you can find me on Substack. It's chris.substack.com. Those are the 2 places where you can find me.
All right. Thank you once again, Krysanne, for coming and for sharing your life. We had an amazing time listening to you and listening to your testimony. Hope to meet you soon. Hope to have this probably another episode with you live here someday. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much. God bless.
God bless.